So far, most of the numbers we've been working with have been whole numbers, or integers. However, as you may have noticed, other types of numbers do exist in Python. Here, dividing one integer by another gives us a number that isn't an integer, 0.75. In Python and computing in general, we represent such a number as a float, which is short for floating point number. A float is a real number that uses a decimal point to allow numbers with fractional values. Even if one integer divides another exactly, the result will be a float. The int and float are actually two kinds of data types. In Python, every object you encounter will have a type. An object's type defines which operators and functions will work on that object and how they work. You can check the type of any object directly using the built-in function type. Here, you can see that the type of a number without a decimal and a number with a decimal are different in Python. To make an int, just give a whole number without a decimal point. Here is an int. To make a float, include a decimal point. If the number itself is actually a whole number, that's okay. You don't even have to put anything after the decimal point. These are both floats. An operation involving an int and a float always produces a float. Sometimes you might need to manually convert one numeric type to another, and you can do that by constructing new objects of those types with int and float. When we convert a float to an int, the part of the number after the decimal point is cut off, which means that no rounding occurs. 49.7 is cut to 49. 4.0, calculated from 16 divided by 4, is cut to 4. Converting from int to float adds decimal 0 to the end of the number. So we've seen Python's two main numeric types, integers and floating point numbers. What are they good for? There are many times when you might need to count items or need to rely on the result of a computation being an integer. For example, let's say you want to count how many people showed up to your dinner party. You can't count 0.47 of a person, so you use an integer. If what you're working on isn't necessarily a whole number, a float is the type you're looking for. For example, let's say you made 5 pies for your dinner party and you want to keep track of the amount of pie left. People usually take 1/6 of a slice. Once one slice is taken, you're down to 4.83 pies. So you use a float. Floating point numbers are approximations of the numbers they're supposed to represent. This is necessary because floats can represent an enormous range of numbers. So in order to fit numbers in computer memory, Python must use approximations. This trade-off can sometimes have surprising results. Because the float, or approximation, for 0.1 is actually slightly more than 0.1, when we add several of them together, we can see the difference between the mathematically correct answer and the one that Python creates. In most contexts, these small differences are irrelevant, but it's important to know that they're there. You can read more about this in the instructor notes.